Right. This module is Advanced Local Syntax 2. It's focused on issues and exercises of advanced syntax. We've got some, if you're new to this, there's two other modules that would be a place to start rather than this. We'll spend a lot of time talking about the programming features of MOCA, error handling, and in the end you should be able to view MOCA as a scripting language. So in the past 14 years or so, we've done a lot to add capabilities inside MOCA. In the near future, actually, you'll start to be able to write MOCA as JavaScript. And that's going to be in the subsequent releases. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to feed into, whether that's a discrete thing or, TM thing or whatever. But I think that just shows you that, we're committed to moving this capability forward. And I think there's some exciting things that are on the horizon there. But for now, there's a lot of things that we can, a lot of capabilities that we can rely on. And so we're going to talk about syntax elements, MOCA functions, and variable substitution, the main things. So what I've got here is a list of the reserved words in MOCA. This is as a pretty current list. Most of these things are pretty obvious. And if, else, try, catch, those sorts of things. Like, not, no. So the most common thing that's done inside of a MOCA component would be, simple if testing. So using if, you can do and or, so you can say if @ variable equals literal, or variable 2 equals literal 2, and. So we use post-order parser, which means that we actually are parsing out the syntax, so we can actually tell the scope of your if test. So we'll actually do the if tests in the right order based on the scope that you include for parens. And then the if test impacts the subsequent command or command. Think about the thing after it of an if test is always a command block. And a command block can be one command or a bracket block. And then you can add some catch or try-catch handling in there. There's some very handy things that we do from MOCA's perspective. So you can do things like is not, like null, that sort of thing. So you can say error code like pack%. Now, the reality is, what I would prefer to see if somebody's going to do something like this is have a list of the pack areas in policies and then do a select from the policy table to do that. But because one never knows what they're going to do, they might name something completely different than in component breaks. I don't like to have this kind of thing. But if you're getting in there and writing component, this is fair game. You can say if var field is null. That's really the same as if saying if not at var field. If a var field, so you can say if null, if not, and then this likewise you can say is not null. That's like saying if at var field. So if you just put if at field, it checks for the existence of the field in context. And then we can do some try-catch stuff for error handling. Variable replacement. Most common thing to do is at variable name. The next most common thing is at plus variable. So then this is very useful if you don't know if data is going to be missing or not. And so you can just go if at plus. And also it's a very nice little shortcut. If you are publishing data as you should coming out of a bracket block, you can just go publish data where at plus variable, at plus variable, and at plus variable, and boom, you don't have to do this equals that, and this equals that, and this equals that. Just go at plus variable, at plus variable, at plus variable. Very handy. So it makes the idea of publishing data out of those bracket blocks even easier. So there's some variations on here. At ampersand, at asterisk. At is a special kind of variable. We have a couple environment variables, typically things like dev code that gets passed in. Dev code is actually part of the underlying communication structure. It actually gets put into the packet that gets sent across the wire, and to retrieve it out of there, you use the at variable name. At question mark is very handy for, we'll talk about that in a minute, for handling errors. It returns the status of the last invocation. Some handy functions. You got min-max functions, length, in-string, substring we actually use from time to time when you're trying to figure out what's going on with particular data. Again, if you're using this, instead of using a policy to, like, say, here are the area codes that we're going to use, I would say it's safer to do the policies. Those are small performance price to pay, but it's fair game to say, if the first 3 letters are this or whatever, it's fair game. It's up to your project teams. I mean, it's certainly fair game from MOCA's perspective. Me personally, would I like to see them in policies to say which areas are we treating different? Absolutely. But this is fair game. So we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about catching errors. MOCA sees, as we've talked about before, MOCA sees an error as any non-zero result. We've actually spent a lot of time talking about whether we should actually have alternate successful and all the rest of that jazz. And I think actually that probably will be something that, if they haven't done, will be done at some point, because alternate successful completion would make coding a lot easier, because if you could say, hey, this thing, it's okay if it returns either EOK or 1403, no rows affected. It'd be nice to be able to do that sort of thing. At the command definition, to say, this command, if you see this coming out of here at the command definition level, that comes out with a 1403, hey, no worries, man. So anyway, there's 2 standard ways to deal with this. One is to place a catch statement within the context of the command that's being issued. So a lot of times you will see something like this: select something, and then you'll see a catch right on the select. That is a very useful way of handling catches. Now we'll talk about the catching bigger blocks and different things later. As you start to catch larger chunks of blocks, there is some danger, okay, in what you do next. So that's why I do like the idea of having your catches very precisely placed. So the at question mark stores the exception, and you can then use that as an argument to an if test and decide what to do. It also works in the scope of brackets, so you can basically put a catch under a bracket block, and if there's anything that happens inside of that bracket block, you can catch it at that level. Try-catch blocks. Basically, if you've done any programming in the last few years, try-catch is a very common way of handling errors inside programming languages. Makes it easy because you don't have to catch every single thing. You can basically say, try this, catch these. However, be cautious about doing try-catch blocks, because if you say try catch and you catch a 1403 and you have a bunch of things happening, what thing had a 1403? And what is the situation that you need to react to now? So as I was saying, the thing about catching is being precise about your placement. So if you know for a fact that the only thing that can happen out of this bracket block is a 1403 from one of your component calls, then sure, you can catch that there and say, well, there's nothing to do. If one of these 3 things returned a 1403, catch it at the bottom of the block, and catch it and just go on with everybody's life. I actually saw this component, go out to somebody here. Be cautious about this try block. They put a try block around a bunch of component calls that had a move inventory call in it. Now the thing about our components is, our components know that MOCA is going to roll back if things aren't successful. You could get 3/4 of the way through the move, have updated 6 out of 9 tables, and then something could say, yeah, I don't think so. Well, we're going to do this move. And then it would raise an error. It's not going to roll back or anything because it's not move's job to roll back, right? Okay, so now somebody caught this and then they wanted to do something nifty to say, okay, whenever we get a move, I want to know when we get a move inventory error, I want to know what this thing is. So they said, okay, I'm going to catch it and I'm going to write a daily tran entry out, which is really pretty cool idea, I think, really, to do something if they get a move error. The problem is that they coerce the return status back to EOK, right? So now move is half updated, right? You're going to say commit, but you've got 6 out of 9 tables saying it did the move, and then whatever table it happened to fail the first time they found this, it failed on an update to the pick move table, which tends to happen from time to time, right? Because if somebody moves something into an area that they've already moved into, the pick moves will fail. They've got a 510 error. Well, so sure, they actually did almost all. If you look at the way move works, we do a lot of work in there before we check the pick moves. So they had moved a bunch of the stuff. They had not updated other things, and the inventory was in really nasty condition here. Why? Because they caught it, didn't know how much move it had already done, right? And then said, okay, we're going to write a daily tran, coerce the status back to EOK. And as far as MOCA is concerned, hey, no harm, no foul. Because as far as it's concerned, it saw an EOK coming back out of here. So now you have move did 3/4 of its job, half the tables are updated, the INV move records, INV look, all that stuff, the sum records are all screwed up. And somebody's got to go in, poor support people, got to go in there because somebody went in there and put this goober on there. All right? So now, what should have happened here? This is not totally a bad idea. It's just poorly implemented. If you're going to do something like this, you need to understand if you coerce the return status back to EOK, you need to understand what pieces of data are in motion. Okay, never coerce the return status back to EOK if you call something like move or allocate or any of the big intrinsic functions that you don't know exactly what it might be doing. The thing about a component architecture is we don't have to know. I don't know what move does. I don't know everything that move does. I don't need to know. I just know if I need to move something, I got move to do it, right? So it does about 20 million things depending on the context of the call. Half of those things may or may not have been done by the time it got to that statement there where we're coercing that return status back. Now what they should have done there is either not done this at all, right, and done something out of context, or they should have a rollback right before that write daily tran to say, I know that I don't know what was going on, but whatever was going on I don't care about now because I'm going to take responsibility. I'm going to roll back. I'm going to write the daily tran and coerce this back to EOK. Right? So the thing about catch blocks is make sure we understand what we're catching, the situation that we're catching, if we are coercing the return status back to EOK. So we don't accidentally cause ourselves to commit stuff that causes just a big booger in the database. Technically speaking. Okay, so mind the fact also that loops in MOCA are implicit. So every time you bring back a result set, essentially the next thing that happens is a for each loop. If you are uncertain about exactly what's going to go on, sometimes what we'll do is use this redirection syntax that basically will allow you to redirect the output into its own result set. and name it a named result set. So this is very handy. However, do me a favor. Do not use res as your argument, as the name of your result set. We've had more than one instance where, because that's the default, and the product guys do that somebody said, oh, I'm going to store this out, and I'm going to call it res. Well, it's in context as res. And then some component downstream, some product component says, well, let's see if I'm doing this. Oh, if I have a res, I'm going to do this. Well, it has a res. It had nothing to do with the res it was expecting, right? Because a res is just a result set. Okay? Component was blowing its brains out periodically because it would run into this situation where we get a result set, called it res. We found it as res because res is the default. No matter what people call it, typically what they'll do is they'll alias something as res even though they name it something different. So we picked it up as a res. So I would prefer, I don't know if you have a standard for this, Mike. I would like you to say my res or var res or something like that so it gets it out of the stream of being thought of as a res to any component that might have that set up as its default argument name. Some other things that people do when they're trying to operate just on one. A lot of times they'll do a select and say where row num is less than 2, get the first one back. Fine, absolutely works. The only problem with that is that in that sort of where clause where you say where this equals that and row num is less than 2, the row num constraint is applied prior to the order by most databases, right? So it'll basically retrieve a row and say, oh, hey, I got one it's less than 2. It's not going to bother. Now, at that point, if you say less than 5 and then do an order by, it'll say, okay, got those 5 records, and those things will order by. But within the scheme of there was actually 1,000 records there, were they the first 5? Well, probably not. Okay, so be cautious on this. We'll see this most often when we're just looking for a piece of data from like a load or something, and we know that there's going to be one there. We just need one piece of data back. We don't care, whatever. It's going to be it's in this location, one of these loads. It's all going to be the same. Fine, just bring it back. But we have had people call from time to time saying, I really need the first one back. And well, that's when I don't know if there's any other ways to do it. This is the way I always do it. I just use the published top rows. Yeah. So basically what it does is create the result set, and then once it has a result set, then MOCA just peels off the first 5 or the first X of those. So now the order by has been applied, all the rest of that jazz has been applied, you got it in the right order, now we can peel off the first X number of those items.
Is there something like publish bottom?
I'm not aware. Pardon?
Change the order.
Yeah, you could change the order by. The question was, is there a published bottom rows? And I'm not aware of it. You could just change the order by. Okay, some things, and we've talked about this in previous modules. Always try to be affirmative about what's coming out of a bracket block. It makes it easy for the next person in there looking to see what you're trying to do. If you aren't affirmative about what comes out of there, I would, as a developer, I would say you don't care what's coming out of there. Now, the one thing I would say is if I see a select as the last statement, then I know, that's just as good as publishing data out of there, right? So if I see the select as the last statement coming out of a bracket block. But if you're just doing stuff and then you just like if this, and then nothing comes out of there, I think I don't even know how to read that. So be affirmative about what comes out of a bracket block. Also, I found this bug. Somebody showed this to me. I can't figure this out. I'm doing this if test, and then it's just not working. Well, this is an error called referring to forms of syntax, right? Forms of syntax, like how you create your statement, how you format it, has nothing to do with how we read it. In this case, the if test only applies to the move statement, right? Not this pipe to complete var custom work thing. Right? It's easy to see this and say, well, I don't know what the heck, why would that not work? Well, because we actually see those things as two different commands. So the if test affects the next command block. Without a bracket, the next command block is the next command, one command, in this case, move inventory, not move inventory pipe to whatever that var function is. Right? So don't rely, and this actually took a couple people, because this is not, you look through code and you're in there thinking, gosh, I don't know why that's not working right. Why is that var thing always firing even though move isn't? So the way around this, the easy way around this is to just format your code really nicely, okay, where you don't put compound commands on one line. It makes it easy for everybody to see. So if you put command, pipe, command, it will be really obvious the fact that it's if, command, pipe, command, as opposed to if this next line, because it's easy to go in there and read if this next line, whereas this next line is actually two different commands. So be conscientious as far as the way you format your code, and it helps everybody. This actually was a bug that took us a while to find because it just was not, and we weren't looking for this sort of thing. Actually, it didn't take me very long to find, but because I've seen it before. It's a common thing. So in this advanced module, you should have a good concept of the advanced syntax command of MOCA, if, then else, how to construct those commands. Variations on variable substitution, at plus, at sign replacement, most common, at variable name, at plus being the next most common. We should be able to use some MOCA functions inside of if tests, so in string, that sort of thing. Understand catch and try and catch logic and understand why we would do things differently and be cautious about how the larger the area that you're trying to catch, the more cautious you need to be about what's going on inside them. And then know some of the common mistakes with regard to catch blocks and that sort of thing. Okay.